The arrival, the sky above Earth, looked quiet from space like a blue marble floating alone in the dark. But aboard the vast alien command ship, hovering just beyond the moon, the crew watched the spinning planet with disappointment. They had traveled across several galaxies to study what they thought might be a rising species, but what they found was chaos, pollution, and noise. The alien commander, named Velkar, stood tall with silver skin and crystal eyes. He crossed his forearms and turned to his team and said, "This is the weak world we came to observe. I expected something more powerful, more evolved, but this is pathetic. Their cities are clustered, their technology looks crude, and their species seems divided. They have no unity. No great achievements to show." The science officer, named Krullen, flicked his fingers and shifted the glowing screen on the wall, showing images of Earth's wars, disasters, and strange rituals. The aliens laughed and mocked the humans, calling them noisy, soft, and self-destructive. A junior technician named Luro, who had remained quiet, finally spoke with hesitation. He said, "Commander, perhaps we should scan their atmosphere. It could tell us something deeper." Velkar raised an eyebrow and said, "Why would we waste energy on that? What could possibly be hidden in this dirty air?" But Luro stood firm and said respectfully, "Sir, sometimes what is hidden in the smallest place carries the greatest truth." Velkar smirked and waved his hand. "Fine, scan the atmosphere, and let's see what the weaklings breathe. Maybe it will give us a good laugh." The command center lights dimmed slightly as their scanners activated. Waves of alien energy swept through the thin layers of Earth's sky, collecting data, measuring particles, and decoding molecular patterns. Everything was routine, until suddenly an alarm shrieked across the deck. The lights flashed red, and the scanners froze. The data coming in made no sense. Krullen shouted, "What is this? This is not possible. There are over 300 unstable compounds in their air. Some of them should be fatal. How are they breathing this?" Velkar stared at the data with disbelief. The readings showed not just oxygen and carbon, but traces of explosive chemicals, radiation, microtoxins, and unknown energy signatures. It was a chaotic soup of elements that should have wiped out any intelligent species long ago. Yet the humans thrived within it. Another alarm rang, and the ship's internal filters activated defensive barriers around. The lab began to hum as if Earth's atmosphere could somehow reach them from across space. One alien analyst named Yevon whispered, "Is it alive? Is the atmosphere itself conscious?" Velkar barked nonsense, but even his voice had lost its strength. As more data poured in, they found traces of nanoscopic organisms that could resist extreme temperatures, survive deep in lungs, and even alter their form in response to emotion in air. That was impossible, wasn't it? Luro stepped closer to the main screen, his voice low and steady. He said, "They call this planet home, but maybe it is more than just a home. Maybe it is their weapon, maybe it is their mother and their armor and their history. Maybe we made a mistake thinking they are weak because of how they look." The room fell into silence as everyone looked again at the peaceful blue planet below. The scans continued, but the deeper the data went, the stranger it became. Heat patterns over cities looked like neural activity, as if the planet itself was thinking. Lightning storms moved in strange rhythm that did not match natural laws, and oceans pulsed in sync with human migrations. Velkar ordered shut down the scan and purge the data, but it was too late. The system had already sent the findings to the rest of the fleet across the stars. Questions were being asked. Rumors were spreading. The humans were not what they appeared. The atmosphere told a story. The aliens were not ready to read a story written in fire and blood and struggle, a story of creatures who adapted to pain, who lived in pressure and breathed in death and laughed through storms. Velkar turned slowly and looked at Luro and said, "You may have just started something. We cannot stop." Luro simply nodded as the Earth turned slowly beneath them, unaware, or perhaps fully aware, of the watchful eyes above. The silence on the alien ship stretched long and cold, the command deck filled with tension and quiet. Panic, though no one dared to speak it. Every alien there felt it in their core. Something was wrong, something deeper than the data could explain. Velkar stood stiffly with his eyes fixed on the suspended image of Earth, his thoughts running wild as the numbers on the screen refused To change the atmosphere should not hold so many unstable elements and still support life. Not just life, but a species that walked unarmored, breathed unfiltered air, and carried on daily activity as if the invisible dangers did not exist, Krillin. The science officer clenched his jaw and barked, "I want a second scan, triple focus down to the molecule, maybe. The first one was corrupted. Maybe our system picked up an echo from another world." But Luro, the technician, slowly shook his head. He said, "We cross-checked the results 5 times. There is no echo. This is their air. And they are breathing it daily. The implications of this shook the senior officers. If the humans could breathe this and survive, they had either mutated beyond comprehension, or something within them shielded them from the toxic layers above." Velkar turned sharply and said, "We need visual confirmation. Deploy a probe, atmospheric grade, and get us eyes on these creatures. I want to see how they walk through that storm." The command center hummed as a sleek black probe shot from the ship and entered Earth's upper atmosphere. It was designed to survive extreme heat, cold pressure, and radiation. The best of alien engineering yet. As it dropped through the clouds, nearing the dense air, where the strange particles danced, something unexpected happened. The probe systems blinked once, then again, and then everything went dark before it could send any image, before it could transmit one word. It was gone. Silence returned, but this time it was louder than before. Velkar's face grew pale. The crew exchanged nervous glances. One whispered, "Maybe it malfunctioned," but Krillin growled, "That probe could dive into the heart of a neutron star. This is no malfunction. Something took it or something broke it, and I fear it was the air itself, just the air." Luro leaned over a secondary console and activated archived satellite footage from Earth. They watched humans walk through smoke, heavy rain, dust storms, and industrial smog without masks, without fear. They saw children playing outside near factories, and massive clouds swirling above them, glowing with odd light, and still the children laughed unbothered. This was not resilience, this was something else. Velkar whispered, "No armor, no filters, no visible protection. And still they thrive. Even our outer skin suits would fail under those conditions. How are they alive?" Krillin accessed another database and showed thermal readings of human lungs breathing in these compounds. Again and again, over a lifetime, even newborns took their first breath in this chaotic mixture. Luro then displayed another comparison. Human lung tissue versus alien lung design. Their own people needed careful pressure balance, filtered air, and safe temperatures, yet humans functioned in environments that should cook cells from the inside. They watched humans climb mountains with thin oxygen, dive into black oceans filled with pressure and toxins, walk through deserts with fire in the air, and cold places that froze skin in seconds. They adapted without complaint, and in fact, many seemed to seek these challenges willingly in their games and sports. It made no sense. Krillin added, "I have found traces of uranium dust and microsoot in cities, and yet cancer rates fluctuate without pattern. Some die, but some evolve. Their bodies fight back, their cells rewrite themselves constantly. This species is not fragile, it is unstable, but that instability makes them unbreakable." Velkar clenched his fists and shouted, "Then what do we do? How do we study something that bends the rules, something that lives in contradiction? How do we control something that refuses to follow pattern?" Silence answered again, until Luro said softly, "Maybe we don't control, maybe we observe, or we leave before it gets worse." Velkar turned his head slowly and said, "Worse? How could it get worse?" Luro looked up and said, "We are already breathing trace particles from their upper atmosphere. They have reached our ship. Filters can hold back matter, not information, and this air, it carries information, feelings, history, pain, maybe even memory, and we just opened our ship to it." Velkar froze as that realization sank into the core of every alien present. The air was not just toxic, it was intelligent, or at least it carried the fingerprints of intelligence, and now that intelligence was inside their systems, their ship, and perhaps inside them. The biggest mistake was thinking they were just watching a lesser race, when in truth, they had already entered a battlefield, and Earth had made the first move without firing a single shot. The unexpected signal. alien command ship drifted slowly above Earth, its outer hull now shimmering faintly as if reacting to something unseen deep within its core. Strange vibrations pulsed through the walls, like a heartbeat that did not belong to the ship. Velkar stood in the center of the observation deck, watching his crew grow restless. Their skin seemed slightly darker, their eyes slower to blink, and some officers had begun to speak in fragmented phrases, as if their minds struggled to hold steady thought. Krellin, the science officer, paced back and forth, murmuring calculations to himself, but none of them made sense anymore. The numbers on his screen twisted every time he looked away and returned. Luro, the junior technician who first suggested scanning the atmosphere, sat at his station. Silent, focused. His hands moved quickly across the interface, like he was following some rhythm only he could hear. Then, without warning, a soft tone echoed through the ship. Not an alarm, not a call, just a pulse, a repeated beat that rose and fell like breath. Everyone stopped moving. The tone continued for 12 seconds, then ended, leaving the crew staring at each other. Velkar barked, "What was that? Who sent it?" Luro checked his panel, and his fingers froze. The signal came from inside the ship, but it was not from our systems. It came from an intercepted wave, a human one. Velkar stepped closer and asked a message. Luro nodded slowly. Sort of. It came from one of their weather balloons, a civilian device meant to track winds and pressure, but it carried more than data. It carried sound, and it bounced off our shield just right to break through our filters. Velkar looked confused. Sound? What kind of sound? Luro played it, and the ship changed at once. Laughter, music, screams, whispers, all mixed into a strange audio storm flooded the command deck. The voices came in hundreds of tones and languages. The rhythm moved like a river, wild and beautiful. Some of it was calm, some violent, some sounded like sorrow being sung in a choir, others like pure chaos on fire. And yet there was structure. It was not noise, it was something alive. It struck deep into the minds of the aliens. The crew staggered, some fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Others stood still with wide eyes, mouths open, as if gasping without breath. One officer wept without knowing why. Another laughed, then screamed, then fell silent. Velkar shut off the sound, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Krellin stood slowly, his voice shaking. "I saw things, places, memories, not mine. Faces, human faces, singing to me, showing me fire and birth and war and peace. It was not just sound, it was history." Luro said, "They do not send commands. They do not demand surrender. They send stories. Earth speaks in emotions carried by waves. Their atmosphere sings, and we are not prepared to hear it." Velkar turned toward the screen. Earth looked calm, blue oceans, white cloud cities glowing under sunlight, yet the commander now saw it differently. The humans did not scream into the void. They whispered into their own air, leaving messages in the wind for those who could hear. It was a form of communication, not with words, but with emotion and energy and memory. A system they never announced, never admitted, yet always used. The commander asked quietly, "Why did the signal hit us now?" Luro looked down, then said, "Because we opened our ship to their sky. We invited the air to speak, and it did." Krellin added, "And now it knows us. It has scanned us as we scanned it. It knows what we fear and what we hope, even our unspoken thoughts." The commander paused, then said, "Prepare for departure. We leave this orbit now." But the engines refused to engage. The ship flickered, the power dimmed, and systems rebooted one by one, slowly, as if in resistance. Krellin stared at his console and whispered, "I think we are no longer in control. This ship is reacting like a living being, infected with memory from Earth, not corrupted. Just changed." Luro said, "We opened a window and something looked in, but it did not attack. It just watched, and now it waits." Velkar gritted his teeth and said, "Then we must find a way to speak back. We must send a signal of our own, one that shows we are not afraid." But before any reply could be prepared, the screen changed again, this time with a pulse of binary from Earth, simple, calm, and steady. 3 words: leave or adapt. The crew stared in silence again, and this time the fear was no longer hidden. The humans had spoken, not with fire or threats, but with the most terrifying weapon of all: choice. Velkar looked at Luro and said, "What does it mean?" And Luro said, "It means we are being tested, not in war, but in understanding. If we cannot learn their way, we will never survive their world. Velkar nodded once and whispered, then let us learn before it is too late. The genetic horror, the silence inside the alien vessel was not natural. It was the kind that wrapped around the heart and squeezed slowly, the kind that crawled through wires and metal and flesh. As Velkar stood before the genetic analysis chamber, he felt something he never admitted before. Doubt. Krellin and Luro followed closely behind him, their eyes no longer sharp, their posture softer, as if Earth's whispering sky had touched more than their thoughts. It had begun shaping their very bodies. The ship had been running full bioscans since the first probe was lost, and now the results blinked on the screen, waiting for someone brave enough to read them. Luro stepped forward and activated the report. The lights dimmed and a projection bloomed in the air. A spinning strand of human DNA hovered before them, shifting, pulsing, adapting faster than anything in their databases. Krellin narrowed his eyes and muttered, this is not just complex, it is chaotic, and yet it functions. How does it function? Velkar asked. Show me the core structure. Luro zoomed in. The strands bent and rewrote themselves in layers. Humans did not just evolve, they self-corrected in real time. The code of life inside them was not stable but reactive. It welcomed stress, pain, pressure. It learned from trauma. The scans showed years of pollution, disease, starvation, war. And still the human genome refused to collapse. Instead, it used the damage as fuel. Krellin pointed to markers in the DNA lines. These are pain memory responses. They adapt based on suffering. The body remembers injury and rewires future generations to resist it. This is not evolution. This is war-forged biology. Luro added, some of their traits only appear under extreme duress, fire, flood, fear, even emotional trauma triggers genetic shifts. We are not looking at a fixed species. We are looking at living potential, a species that builds itself by walking through pain. Velkar felt his chest tighten as more data spilled across the screens. Immune responses stronger than any known species. Brain plasticity that rivaled artificial minds, and an emotional range that could trigger physical transformation. Laughter and sorrow could literally shape their biology. Krellin said in a whisper, they cry, and something changes. They rage, and their bodies harden. They love, and their hearts extend lifespan. This is not just DNA. This is history, emotion written in flesh. Velkar stepped back. The walls of the lab suddenly felt too close. He had spent his life studying species, classifying them, breaking them into strengths and weaknesses, but nothing prepared him for a species that made strength from weakness. Humans did not wait for change, they became it. Luro displayed cross-references with alien biology. The results were horrifying. Their species required stability, predictable environment, calculated growth. Human biology thrived on chaos. The more pressure applied, the stronger they became, and Earth provided the perfect storm, its atmosphere filled with invisible trials. Microbes that taught the immune system, lightning that rewrote neural signals, sound waves that carried emotional frequencies, even light that altered mood and focus. It was as if the planet itself was built to sculpt survivors. Velkar turned to the crew and said, then we were never meant to stand above them, not as observers, not as conquerors. We assumed they were weak because they bled, but we did not see how that blood became memory, how they used pain to become more, not less. Krellin opened another file, a database of human history focused on disaster and recovery. The numbers were impossible. World wars, global pandemics, environmental collapse, and still humanity not only survived, it thrived each time. They lost, they returned stronger. Each time they were broken, they rebuilt faster. Their minds found meaning in suffering, and their stories turned grief into strength. Velkar whispered, and we thought them primitive, we called them soft. We mocked their cities, and now their air reshapes our ship, and their music rewrites our thoughts. We thought our shields would protect us, but we let in something deeper. We let in their spirit, and now it grows inside us. Luro said, I ran a scan on the crew. Half of us show cellular adjustment. Already minor shifts, but real shifts, increased emotion spikes, reflex enhancements, even memory overlap. We are not just studying them, we are becoming touched by them. Velkar looked at Earth again. The blue swirl beneath them now seemed more like a forge than a home, a place that carved its children through endless trial and gave them only one law: survive and never stop changing. He turned and ordered full lockdown, no more scans, no more exposure. But even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. Something ancient and powerful had awakened inside them, not by force, not by invasion, but by invitation. Earth did not need weapons. Earth had stories and air and pain and humans to carry it. And now the ship was not just infected, it was listening, learning, and perhaps becoming something else entirely. The atmosphere strikes back. The ship no longer felt like their own. The walls breathed faintly. The lights pulsed in rhythm with something unseen and deep within the engines. Strange echoes whispered in tones that matched no language recorded in alien databases. Velkar stood on the bridge and watched as the Earth rotated peacefully below. But he no longer believed in peace. He believed now in the quiet rage of a world that had endured too much to remain silent forever. The crew moved slower, their expressions clouded. Some were strange smiles. Others trembled without reason. Luro sat at his station, but his skin was slightly darker. His breathing had changed, and when he spoke, his voice carried an unfamiliar rhythm. Not alien, not human, something in between. The air filtration system began failing in small compartments, not because of sabotage, but because the particles from Earth had adapted to bypass alien barriers. Microbes, once passive, now shifted in density and form. They found holes in their defense, not by attack, but by transformation. Filters melted slowly, as if rusted from within. But there was no corrosion, just molecular mimicry. Each microbe copied its surroundings until the system stopped seeing it as a threat and welcomed it as part of itself. Krellin staggered into the lab, clutching his chest, his vision blurring with flashes of human memory that were not his. He saw burning forests, collapsing towers, humans holding hands in rain, humans dying and laughing, humans screaming into wind. He shouted, "This is not infection. This is inheritance." Velka rushed to him, but Krellin had already collapsed, gasping. He looked up and said, "I heard a child singing in the dark, and then I knew the Earth is not fighting us, it is changing us, showing us what it means to survive." Luro activated emergency override, trying to force the ship's systems into isolation mode, but each command was delayed, then rewritten. The code responded with strange symbols. Some resembled Earth languages, others looked like broken binary laced with musical rhythm. The systems were no longer running. They were performing like instruments guided by something that had entered not just the air, but the ship's memory core. The crew began reporting hallucinations, shared dreams, synchronized thoughts. 2 engineers saw the same woman in a red coat walking down a street that did not exist. Others heard voices in their sleep, reciting poetry from lost human authors. None of them had ever studied Earth culture, yet the memories were clear, accurate, emotional. Velkar called for medical scans, but the medbots returned data that defied logic. Neural pathways were forming in new directions. Old fears were being overwritten with unfamiliar hope and sadness. Fear had become beauty, pain had become art, and the crew was forgetting who they were, not by force, but by choice, because the story Earth was telling was stronger than their own. The ship began to drift closer to the atmosphere, not by engine power, but as if drawn by gravity that should not exist. Earth's upper winds brushed the hull like fingers not of destruction, but of invitation. The clouds moved in patterns too perfect to be natural, spiraling in symbols that matched ancient human carvings. Luro said, "We opened the gate, we let in their breath, and now it breathes us too." Velkar stared at him and asked, "Then what do we do?" Luro turned, and his eyes were glowing faintly, not with light, but with memory. He said, "We listen. We feel, we accept, or we fall." The commander tried to resist. He ordered full retreat, maximum thrust, but the engines refused again. The ship responded with soft pulses, as if disagreeing, not malfunctioning, just choosing differently. One final burst of data came through the outer sensors, a low hum carried by wind, filled with encoded sound patterns, images and frequency shifts. When decoded, it showed images of human struggle and victory, pain and dance, love and war, a billion fragments of human Story all wrapped in light and silence. The ship did not crash, it simply hovered on the edge of surrender. Velkar dropped to his knees and felt the cold floor under his hands. But it was no longer cold, it pulsed. With warmth, like skin, like heartbeat. He whispered, "Is this defeat?" Luro said softly. "This is recognition. We thought we saw a broken world, but we found something unbreakable. And now it wants to show us what survival means, not through weapons, not through weapon, through the power to endure, to feel, to remember, and to never give up." Krellin opened his eyes and said, "I remember my first breath at." The human response, the ship floated just above Earth's uppermost clouds, a silent shape wrapped in silence, no longer untouched by the shield. World below, the once gleaming alien command vessel now bore strange fractal lines across. Its outer hull patterns not drawn by tool or hand, but formed naturally by the interaction of Earth's breath with alien metal. The crew had stopped speaking. In commands now they moved like people waking from a shared dream. Their actions slower, gentler, eyes wide with emotions they never had names for. Velkar sat in the central chair, but he no longer ruled the room. He watched, listened, and waited as if sensing something older and larger than himself, approaching slowly through the void. Luro had become the bridge between what was and what could be. He no longer spoke like an officer, but like a storyteller. Every sentence he offered carried weight. Rhythm, a strange comfort that could not be learned, only inherited. He had begun seeing visions even while awake, fragments of human lives, grand and quiet moments that burned in his thoughts. He shared them, without shame, letting others feel what he felt. The crew stopped resisting because the resistance had become hollow, like screaming in wind that carried answers instead of threats. A signal arrived again. This time clear, no encryption, no trick, just one message from Earth's deep ocean. Relay satellites, 12 words burned across the main screen. "Welcome to our world. We bleed, we burn, we rise, we remember." Velkar stood slowly, his voice soft as he read those words aloud, and then silence followed. No one knew what to say because there was nothing to argue, nothing to debate. Earth was not challenging them with war. Earth was inviting them with truth. Krellin stepped forward and said, "Our scans no longer work. The machines show human faces instead of coordinates, laughter instead of frequencies. Data has become memory, information has become emotion. We are not in control because control no longer exists here," Luro added. "Earth's response is not attack, it is exposure. It has shown us what it truly is, and now we must decide if we belong here, or if we run." The decision came from Earth in the form of silence, not retreat, not surrender, not threats. Just pure calm stillness, the kind that asked, "Who are you really, and what have you come to find?" Velkar turned to his officers and asked, "Should we speak? Should we send apology or warning or offer?" But no one replied, not because they lacked words, but because words felt small for a moment like this. Instead, the crew stared at Earth, and one by one began broadcasting something else. Not language, not orders, but memory. Each officer began sending moments of their own past joys, sorrows, dreams, confusion, little fragments of what made them more than rank or skin or species. And Earth listened silently and then returned something back into their minds, not answers, but connection, images of human children dancing in muddy streets, soldiers burying comrades, lovers parting in war, families reuniting in ruins, and a single heartbeat that echoed across the transmission, steady, strong, relentless. Krellin whispered, "I feel it. Their pain is strength, their chaos is unity. We came to study them, but they have studied us better. They saw what we feared and turned it into a mirror." Velkar nodded slowly and turned to Luro. "Should we ask for peace?" Luro shook his head slowly and said, "No, we do not ask, we listen, we adapt, we survive like them. The way forward is not surrender, but understanding. Earth demands that we learn, not beg. Earth tests, not through destruction, but through reflection. It shows us what we could become if we let go of pride and accept the beauty of scars." A final pulse came through the ship in pure binary, a countdown. Not to attack, but to decision, a final moment to choose. The alien commander breathed deeply, not through instinct, but through understanding, and with a voice that no longer held command, but held story. He said to the ship, "Open our hearts to them, let them see what we are, and let us see what they are." And in that instant the ship lowered slightly, brushing the edge of Earth's upper sky, and instead of fire, there was light, instead of storm there. The end of arrogance. The ship had changed completely. It no longer floated like a stranger in the sky. It now drifted as if it belonged there, as if the winds themselves had shaped it into something more than alien, more than machine. The hull was no longer smooth. Instead it carried ridges, patterns, stories etched by the atmosphere, stories that moved and shimmered when touched with light. The crew had changed too. Their uniforms had loosened, their voices softened, their postures now relaxed, and alive eyes, once sharp with fear, now wide with awe and wonder. Even the language between them had shifted, no longer clipped and sterile now. It flowed with tone and rhythm that matched the pulse of the earth below. Velkar stood before the central screen and watched the clouds spin beneath them. He saw the sunlight reflect off oceans and cities, breathing with invisible energy each time he blinked. He felt something echo in his chest, not fear, not confusion, not pride, but connection, and it terrified him in a way war. Never had he turned to Luro and said, "We cannot go back, not to who we were." Luro nodded and said, "We were explorers, pretending to be masters. We thought they were small because we could not measure their meaning in numbers. But now we see they are not weak. They are deep. Each pain they endure adds another layer to their strength." The silence was broken by a final signal from Earth, a transmission sent not with code or force, but with something stronger, a voice. Human, calm, tired, weathered, a woman's voice. It spoke in one language, and yet the entire crew understood, because meaning no longer needed translation. The voice said, "You came from stars to see us, and now you must choose. Do you leave as watchers or stay as learners? This world is not kind, but it is honest. We have no perfection, only persistence. We do not fear change, we become it. Show us who you truly are, and we will show you how we rise." The message ended, and no reply was asked, for only a choice between pride and growth, between silence and song. Volkar stepped forward and touched the command console. The crew watched as he opened a channel to Earth, this time not with shields or demands or protocols, but with memory. He uploaded the entire journey from their first scan to the hallucinations, to the fear, and finally to the acceptance. He added his voice at the end, saying, "We came with eyes open and hearts closed. Now we offer both. Teach us not to be human, but to understand the meaning of endurance." Earth responded with stillness. No signal, no light, no noise, just wind, soft, slow, brushing against the hull, as if saying, "You are heard." And that was enough. The transformation that followed was not dramatic. There was no blast or shift, just a gentle moment where the ship felt lighter. The crew breathed easier, as if welcomed into a circle that had no walls and no thrones. Later weeks passed in silence. The ship remained in orbit, studying not with machines, but with eyes and hearts. The crew began learning Earth's languages, not from databases, but from music and children's stories. They began eating Earth food, one fruit at a time, adjusting their bodies slowly. Their dreams were no longer haunted, but filled with voices that sang instead of screamed. They began to understand that Earth's greatest weapon was not fire or metal, but memory shared willingly, without pride or control. One day, a new pod arrived from the alien fleet beyond the moon. It carried one being, a student, young, untested, sent to see what had gone wrong. But when he arrived, he found not failure but beauty. He stepped into a ship that smelled like soil and wind. He heard music playing softly from the console. He saw officers smiling as they read human poetry, and he knew something had changed forever. Volkar greeted him not as a superior, but as a guide. He said, "We once believed we could conquer what we did not understand. But Earth has shown us that to know is not to break, but to belong, and now you will walk this path with us, not above, not behind, but together." Pod pilot looked out the window and saw the blue planet spinning slowly below its clouds, full of rage and hope, its oceans holding stories too deep for words. He whispered, "What is this place really?" And Velkar said, "This is the only world where the weak survive by becoming strong, and where pain is not a chain but a teacher, and the boy understood not in mind, but in soul. Final report, sent back to the alien fleet, was brief. It held no warnings, no data, just one sentence: Earth cannot be measured, only experienced. The message was marked complete, and the stars remained silent, somewhere down below on a stormy beach. A child looked up and waved, not knowing who watched, and far above in the sky, a ship pulsed once like a heartbeat. No longer for and no, the memory that changed the stars. The child on the beach did not know he was seen, did not know that far above the wind and the clouds and the pull of the sea, an entire ship had paused just for him. His hand rose, not in signal, not in command, just in pure innocent greeting. And somehow that was enough for the alien ship to send one final signal to its fleet, not a warning, not an invitation, just a memory carried in silence. And Windvalkar stood at the viewing glass, eyes on the earth below, and he knew this was no longer a mission, no longer a study or operation. This was now something sacred, something earned through fear and loss, and the courage to surrender, not to a weapon, but to understanding. Behind him the crew worked without orders, guided only by curiosity and the rhythm of their shared awakening. Luro sat with a human book in his lap, pages filled with stories of war and love and pain that turned into peace, and he whispered to himself the names of places he had never walked but now felt in his bones. The ship no longer spoke in alerts or commands. It breathed with the world below, lights shifting in calm patterns that matched the rising sun over mountains. No longer strange to them, even Krellin, who once dismissed emotion as weakness, now sat quietly by the console, painting with his fingers strange shapes on a tablet that somehow told more than numbers ever could. Then came the moment, the true end of what they were and the beginning of what they chose to become. As a soft pulse moved through the ship, the system showed one image, a single human tear falling, not from sorrow but from joy, and beside it one line, written not by command but by collective thought of those aboard. We came to study, but we stayed to feel. Earth did not answer with sound, only with a breeze that lifted waves and brushed mountaintops and danced through cities with laughter hidden inside. Because Earth did not need to speak anymore, it had already told its story through breath and blood and memory. As the ship slowly turned and moved to join the rhythm of the planet, it sent its final log to the stars. No threats, no pride, no calculations, just this: found a world not of perfection but of persistence. A world that suffers and still sings. A world that breaks and still builds. A world that bleeds and still hopes. And in that world we saw ourselves, not who we were, but who we must become. The stars received the message, and for a long time they stayed quiet, as if listening to the wind of Earth themselves. And so the ship that once called Earth weak now called it home, not because it had to, but because it wanted to, because it had learned that strength was never the absence of pain but the courage to carry it with open hands and high above the clouds, with no war, no banner, no empire left to claim. One ship drifted in silence and belonged the end.